The infrastructure deal finally passes, the January 6th committee forges ahead, and just maybe the Trump toxin will start to fade. I doubt it, but that's just a wish. Um, my mother had taught me at a young age to appreciate people who learn very quickly from things. Of course, my mother's definition of learning quickly was that you only had to stick to your finger in a light socket once before learning not to do it again. With that being said, I don't know that a lot of people would pass her test, at least when it comes to politics. Last Friday, shortly before midnight, the House of Representatives finally had passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and they sent it to President Biden for signature. The measure was co-signed by 13 Republicans who crossed party lines to make the bill the greatest example of bipartisanship in the last decade. And still, don't confuse it with the bipartisanship from the past, which meant that large numbers of both parties signing on the bottom line together. But it was a big step, and the bipartisan move gave 6 Democrats the freedom to step away from the measure and vote against it. But do not for a moment believe that purely the symbolic gesture wasn't understood by the White House and sanctioned by the party. The 6 Democrats who wouldn't vote for the bill did so because they wanted the Build Back Better measure voted on at the same time that the House voted on infrastructure, and they were convinced that the BBB would not be voted on otherwise. If Nancy Pelosi had needed those 6 votes to pass the bill, well, the House might still be in session, but I have no doubt she'd have gotten them eventually. But how this all shook out was vintage Washington politics the way it used to be played. Now, Biden's greatest strength, as we found Friday, is working backroom deals and talking with politicians and getting them to come to the table in agreement on important issues. He understands, unlike some of the Democrats who voted against the infrastructure bill, the art of a half a loaf. Getting something is better than getting nothing at all. The Democratic opponents to the bill are more of the two in the bush mind, rather than being happy with the bird in the hand. Former squatter Donald Trump, who was currently trying to sell the maggot Christmas tree ornaments while telling his fans they can win an autographed football by donating money to his stupid cause, was obviously angry and issued the following statement. Very sad that the rhinos in the House and Senate gave Biden and Democrats a victory on the non-infrastructure bill. He called it non-infrastructure, but it was very much an infrastructure bill. The non-infrastructure would have been something that Trump never passed. All Republicans who voted for Democrat longevity should be ashamed of themselves. The people that should be ashamed are people that voted for you, and you didn't give a shit about them. In particular, Moscow Mitch for granting a 2-month stay, which allowed the Democrats time to work things out in our countries and the Republican Party's expense. Now, by Monday, the leadership of what remains of the morally bankrupt GOP was threatening those who had crossed party lines and voted with the Democrats. So, what was that message? What is the Republican alternative to the infrastructure bill? They don't have one. The Missouri Senator Josh Hawley questioned the manhood of Americans who watch too much porn and play too many video games. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who never met a problem he couldn't run away from, had called Big Brother communist. That's the Republicans' agenda. It turned a few heads. Hawley prompted questions of what's too much. A former general who served in both Gulf Wars asked, "What does he think soldiers in the field do in their own downtime?" As Representative Eric Swalwell, a California Democrat, said about Cruz, "Imagine picking a fight with a fictional bird instead of the man who called your wife ugly." Clearly, there are a lot of people who call themselves Republicans who perpetually stick their fingers in light sockets. Perhaps that is why an overwhelming majority of Americans take such a dim view of them. As it is, Trump continues to make as much noise as he can, but the passage of the infrastructure bill may well be a watershed event that finally pushes him to the sidelines and into the recesses of time where he and various other demons of democracy should dwell until they fade from existence. Yeah, we've been wanting Trump to fade from existence, but the stupid idiot keeps popping up. The bill's passage also revives the ideal of a bipartisan cooperation and brings it back into the national consciousness as a solid example of the model of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The old saying, "United we stand, divided we fall." The bill's passage is even more iconic in juxtaposition to what occurred in the federal court this week. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan ruled that Trump cannot shield White House records from the January 6th committee. Squatters are not kings, and the plaintiff is not. President or squatter are not kings, and the plaintiff is not a squatter anymore. Trump, of course, appealed. That's his playbook. Keep everything tied up in court until hopefully it goes away, which won't happen. But the reckoning for Trump's divisiveness continues, and of late he has gathered some steam. Perhaps others are also coming around to the idea that the United States of America is preferable to a divided state of America. As others reported, the House committee investigating the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol announced on Tuesday a new batch of 10 subpoenas to former Trump White House officials as the panel charges ahead and seeking testimony and documents from witnesses that are relevant to its probe. These subpoenas follow 6 others that were announced on Monday. The white supremacist Stephen Miller, Kayleigh McEnany, senior officials in the Trump administration were among those subpoenaed. Miller, the white supremacist Miller, by his own account, participated in efforts to spread false information about alleged voter fraud in the 2020 election, as well as efforts to encourage state legislators to alter the outcome of the November 2020 election, appointing the alternate slate of electors, the committee noted. McEnany, the woman who accused me of being delusional for asking Trump for more than a year ago whether win, lose, or draw, would he accept a peaceful transfer of power, is being sought because, according to the committee, she made multiple public statements from the White House and elsewhere about purported fraud in the November 2020 election. And for example, in the first White House press conference after the election, McEnany claimed that there were very real claims of fraud that the former squatter's re-election campaign was pursuing, and said that mail-in voting was something that we have identified as being particularly prone to fraud. At another press conference, McEnany accused Democrats of welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting, which the illegals cannot vote. She was also apparently hanging around with Trump during the January 6th insurrection, but Trump's woes don't end there. New York prosecutors investigating his business dealings have convened a new grand jury to hear evidence in that investigation, leading to a speculation that the ex-squatter may get an indictment as a Christmas gift, or at the very least a subpoena. Trump has survived inquiries in the past, but he no longer has the services of a fixer like Michael Cohen, or even the decrepit and derelict Rudy Giuliani. Cohen has long said that Trump could face an indictment by the end of the year, and he may be right. But whatever happens to Trump, it is clear that there is a renewed sense that on some basic level, our country works best when we try to work together, which means it doesn't work with Trump involved. It is a message the fascists do not want to hear. It is a message like people like Hawley. It is a message that people like Hawley, Cruz, and Ron DeSantis think they cannot use to get reelected. But if the Democrats and whatever remnants endure of the old Republican Party can beat that drum loudly enough, it will drown out the mutants who can only scream that they are against cooperation, but always fail to provide an alternative policy worthy of consideration. In 2021, we were at that precipice. In 2021, we were at that precipice. This country is dominated by 2 political parties, and one of them has no heart and one has no head. Technically, that would be the Republican Party. They have no heart, no head. By continuing to back Trump's play, what's left of the Republican Party has revealed that it's not only heartless, but they are headless. The GOP is fucking dead. That party is a fucking bloody stump, and individually all that remains are a bunch of schizophrenic, delusional, paranoid, and breeding rednecks that you'd be embarrassed to see at a neighborhood barbecue, sticking their fingers in light sockets while screaming out about Big Bird. Video games and pornography. As former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh said, if you're pro-vaccine, anti-insurrection, and you state the truth that Joe Biden won the 2020 election and won the election fair and square, you have no future as a Republican. Just think about that. And meanwhile, for the Democrats, to prove that they've grown ahead to go with their sizable heart, they need to get inflation under control. Start by just acknowledging that it's a huge fucking problem, and find the decent candidates who are not as marginal as the far right, and continue to pass legislation that helps all Americans, and never stop reminding the voters that that's what they're doing. That continues to be the key Democratic problem: poor messaging. And while the Democratic holdouts in the infrastructure bill indicate there are plenty of people on both sides of the aisle who love to stick their fingers in light sockets, last week's actions also show that there is a renewed hope for a return to sanity. It's a nice way to cruise into Thanksgiving as a nation, and we will have something to be thankful for: infrastructure and hope. But if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.